All right, we're going to talk a little bit about fly line selection now for the Seychelles. In general, you're going to have your lighter rods, and then you're going to have your heavy rod. When talking about lighter rods, we really want to stay a little bit more towards those longer, more subtle tapered lines. Things like, permit specific, all-purpose style fly lines that aren't going to land very hard. Now, the technologies built in some of these lines these days they're going to cast for you because that has a really short, heavy head, but what that's going to do is really impact the water surface quite a bit, and it'll drive not only the fish crazy, but the guides crazy. So try to really focus on lines that are going to have a longer taper and stick to the weight that your rod is. Another common kind of misnomer is overweight my rod so it casts a little bit easier. You're going to run into that same problem. So keeping it subtle, there's great tapers across all the different brands these days. Good hunting there. Now, when talking GT lines, there are specific fly lines out there. Here's two great examples, the Cortland GT Tuna and the Rio GT Elite. These are going to have a very specific purpose in that they have a stronger than usual core, and they're going to have a taper that is big enough to carry over those really big flies that we were just talking about. So while tarpon lines might look like they might match, they're going to have a slightly softer core, and they're not going to hold up like these lines are going to. With these lines, they are going to come without a loop, and that's kind of a different discussion in its own. But essentially, once you've gotten these lines, whether we set it up here in the shop or you get it set up over there, just know that it's going to be a little bit more specific when it comes to putting a leader on that system. Now, here, just a quick example. For an example, those factory lines, they've seen a lot of breakages over the years when they've put a lot of pressure on them. So they've replaced them with a braided sleeving of sorts. For example, this is a Kevlar looping system, very strong braking strength, and it's going to have kind of that Chinese finger trap thing going for it. When shopping lines for GTs, it's always good to have a backup. They will take you straight into the coral when you catch those fish or attempt to catch them. So inevitably you're going to get some chafage or maybe even breakage. So it's a really good idea to have at least one spare GT line. Now, the system I like to use is I do bring one of these little line winders, and I will kind of preset that up before I get out onto the flat. So if I do have some breakage and I need to pull off that old line, I can quickly put this right onto my reel, wind it onto my reel, and then off I go again. As far as traveling with it, well, this is nice because you know what you have. It's going to take up space. It's going to kind of fall apart on you. It's going to take up some weight. I use a system like this to pre-stack it and then maybe use something like pipe cleaner or the little line holder that comes with your lines just to keep it nice and organized like this so I can just grab and go. This line here, for example, this is a sinking line. Now, some of the less traditional fishing, they call dredging over there, where they're going to send big flies like a GT flies down, 30 meters or so and see what comes up. I would say this is not a majority of the time or majority of the people that are going to do this, but something to consider is bringing something like a 500 to a 750 grain fly line. With that, just a little bit of line care. You're going to be fishing while you're waiting. You're going to be fishing from a skiff while you're on a sand beach. Your line's going to go through a lot of wear and tear and get sticky just being in the humid Seychelles. Definitely having some line wipes or cleaners with you is going to be a great idea just to keep you in the game. Overall, though, that's going to be lines for the Seychelles. All right, next we're going to talk about leader and tippet for the Seychelles. In a general sense, a lot of us are used to a tapered leader system. You get in packages just like this. Something that they have just adopted over the years, and you'll see this in a lot of other saltwater destinations now too, is the guides are primarily going to be building out of leader material, a custom leader. So, when considering these, well, it might be nice to have one or two tapered leaders for bone fishing or something like that. In general, they're going to be using leader material, okay? So it's going to be important to pay attention to the pound test you want and the quantities you're going to want. And then we'll talk about some of the attributes of the GT leader that are a little bit more specific. So when talking about the bonefish and permit, you're definitely going to want to have a spool or two of 15 to 16 pound breaking strength fluorocarbon. I say 15 to 16, kind of depends on the brand. All the fluorocarbons out there these days are really nice. But I would recommend 2 spools. Typically these come in a 25 to 30 yard spool. Having about 60 yards of that stuff is going to be quite beneficial because they're going to tie a uniform diameter leader. They're actually going to be using quite a bit of this stuff to create a furled bimini twist leader. So 15 to 16 for bonefish and permit, about 60 yards. Stepping it up, if you're in kind of nastier situations and also kind of transitioning into triggerfish as well, having just the same amount of 20 pound fluorocarbon, having 2 spools, about 60 yards of 20 pound fluoro is going to be great for covering your bases for bonefish, permit, triggerfish, and even milkfish at times. Stepping it up again, now you're coming into 25 pound fluorocarbon. There, you're probably not going to be using it quite as often. I would stick more to probably just 1 spool of it, and that's going to have its place with triggerfish, milkfish, and now you're starting to step into the realm of bumphead parrotfish. Talking bumpies and then some of the other more random species like snappers, emperors, groupers, things like that. That's where 25 up to 40, having a spool of each, a 25 yard spool, 30 yard spool is going to be quite nice. We're hearing more often than not, our guys are starting to fish with 40 pound fluorocarbon for bumpies, and that has some great crossover to some of these other reef species as well. But yeah, in general, for the smaller diameter stuff, let's stick to fluorocarbon. And now we're going to kind of start bumping our way up to the larger diameter stuff. For many, many years, 130 pound breaking strength, that's been the bread and butter. Now, when talking about fluorocarbon versus monofilament, what's interesting is leader material at this diameter actually, has quite a big density. So when you fish a fluorocarbon at this diameter, it's almost going to act as an intermediate tip. So actually, I am going to have a spool of each, kind of depending on the situation. And now that's a little bit more specific. You can get away with one or the other, but just so you know where I'm coming from there is if I feel like I'm fishing a lot of deeper water, I'm going to put on a long fluorocarbon leader. If I'm going to be fishing, fish back out of the water in shallow flats, that's when I'm going to be moving more towards that monofilament. But yeah, then back to kind of breaking strength. Really depends on the situation. A lot of the times when you're in the surf zone or deeper water or on colored bottom, anywhere from kind of your 100 to 130 pound leader, and then as you start stepping into more shallow situations or sand, kind of falling tides, you're going to see places like Cosmolito and even Alphonse where they might step down your fly size a little bit and then step down into that kind of 80, maybe even 60 pound range. Now, pretty specific setup for that area. In general, you're not going to be just blind casting with 60 or 80 pound. You're asking for trouble. So I definitely bring at least one 25 yard spool of 80 pound fluorocarbon. The 60, not as often, but yeah, definitely having one step down if you need it, if the conditions call for it. Often you have those glass off conditions and that 130 just feels like a bit much. But yeah, as far as diameters go, they're all going to be thick in general. We're not trying to be too stealthy for the most part with this big stuff. And the leader system is very basic. They're essentially going to have a perfection loop or some sort of loop knot on the fly line end of things, and then it's going to just be a straight piece down to your fly. So very thick, uniform diameter all the way through the leader, just to keep you out of the bricks and so you don't get broken off. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope this was helpful. Just remember, you can find all this information in the pre-trip planner that we sent you. We'll see you on the water.